among the Detroit Three, their hourly labor costs were over $72 an hour.
Hmm.
In the foreign transplants, they were 45.
Wow, that's a big difference. Dr. Masters, financially speaking, have labor unions helped auto workers in the last several decades? Let me, I should lay it, like, share the premise of my question with you. On the balance, while these strikes may have increased their wages and improved work conditions, has it created a situation in which jobs have become more scarce because now it's more expensive for companies to afford the labor? Does my
Well,
question go ahead?
let me put it this way rather than casting blame, because
Okay.
anything the companies paid to the workers was agreed to by them with the union, even though the union may have been the ones pushing for it. So ultimately, the companies and the union bear responsibility. So therefore, I would say that, and you analyze the situation, you can't help but to note that the the companies found themselves with lopsided labor costs versus their competition. International competition, which is they benchmarked themselves starting in the 1990s and then increasingly up to the um, Great Recession, and then in the decade after that, to the so-called foreign transplants. Those companies like Hyundai and Honda, Toyota, that operated plants in the U.S. And so they would
And they're
compare,
not unionized, right?
yeah, and let's say in the year 2005, relatively speaking, around that time period, they would compare their labor costs across those groups. And among the Detroit Three, their hourly labor costs were over $72 an hour.
Hmm.
In the foreign transplants, they were 45.
Wow, that's a big difference.
And so the costs became prohibitive, and the companies also had overcapacity. Their market share was declining, and they weren't producing as many cars. And so they had too many plants. They paid their workers too much in the way of benefits, particularly. They had huge liabilities on their balance sheets for pensions and retiree health care
Hmm.
that they had to get rid of to make themselves competitive. And so they went through a painful downsizing of reducing their footprint, eliminating plants, restructuring, siphoning off their some of their parts producers, such as Delphi,
I remember that. Yeah.
and also they um, had to eliminate retiree health care, eliminate defined benefit pension plans, eliminate the so-called jobs bank, which paid workers basically to be unemployed at off the company dime, and also to eliminate the cost of living allowance. So they did all those things.
And GM and Delphi also, I think, both filed for bankruptcy. That was
Yes,
2006. Yeah.
and then GM in 2009, and also Chrysler filed for bankruptcy in 2009, and they both got government subsidies before
Yeah.
then. And so they were in a situation where they had to do major restructuring, get rid of a lot of dealerships, downsize. And so you could say their labor costs are one of the things that caused them to have to shed jobs. But the companies also had built up overcapacity and hired too many workers that they didn't need, and that's why they were laying them off and had to have jobs banks. And so once the economy turned south, and it began to happen in the auto industry before the Great Recession, in which the sales of the companies plummeted, and the companies were in financial hardship before the recession. The recession magnified that, and they had to make further cutbacks, make further concessions in contracts, and basically put themselves on austerity path for several years that the union is trying to catch up with now.
So in this case, it seems like the high wages that union members were paid actually worked against them in that their jobs dwindled, right?
Well, I think I would put it to high compensation, because they had not only higher wages, but the companies, the foreign transplants and others, knew they had to pay their workers a decent wage to avoid a union. But what they didn't have were the health care, retiree health care liabilities. They didn't have the defined benefit pension liabilities, and their health care costs weren't as much because their plans were not as gold plated, and also their workforces were younger
Mm-hmm.
and healthy. So that made all the
Interesting.
difference in the world.
Have there been any in the previous segment? I said we're not going to get into politics. I guess this relates to politics. The right is against unions. Well, sometimes they're for it, as President Trump visited UAW last week. But we usually look at unions as something that is supported by the left, generally speaking. So I'm wondering, so this is an interesting topic. I'm wondering if there have been any academic studies to weigh whether or not on the balance unions have been good for any particular industry. I don't even know how you could sort of put that on a scale, but
Well, certainly there have been a lot of studies that have addressed union effects.
hmm,
Studies have addressed union effects on wages. Studies have addressed union effects on productivity and on profitability, including unit labor costs. I would say that the mix of the results is that unions obviously raise wages. They may diminish profitability.
yeah.
They may increase productivity in selected instances because they hire better trained workers who are more carefully controlled by work rules and management policies than you may have in more non-union situations that in which management may not be held to as high health and safety standards and training standards as they are in the unionized sector.
So that is a mixed result. Um, as we close our conversation, you're there in Detroit, so I wanted to get an eyewitness perspective. First, have you been involved in these negotiations?
No, no,
You have not.
I no.
No. Okay. Were you going to add something qualifying?
Well, I was going to say I have been among manufacturing firms. I have been involved in high level negotiations and seen what goes on behind the scenes. But
Ever
since
with
I
the
came,
UAWA?
since I came here, I in 2009 when I headed a program called Labor Wayne, which included the Doug Fraser Center for Workplace Issues, and Doug Fraser is a former UAW president. I had both labor and management on my board. I've deliberately tried to not get involved in consulting with either with any kind of personal benefit for me
Hmm.
um, with either party because I want to be objective
Yeah,
as I comment in the media on this, I don't want to be in a position where I would feel like it wouldn't be right for me to go out and comment publicly about these situations if I were being paid by one of the parties.
of course. Yeah, that makes sense. Is is this strike a big deal in Detroit?
Yes, you can't get away from it.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's still a auto industry dominated town, so to speak,
And still
and
dominate the town.
yeah, yeah. There you still have people very, it's still the motor city. People focus on cars, the car industry, the big three, and the UAW So those are iconic institutions that play a very large role, larger than life role in this metropolitan area.
Dr. Masters, thank you so much for educating me and our listeners. And to our listeners, if you know of any history that could provide more perspective from the past on this subject, please share it with us and tell us what's your perspective. Thank you so much, Dr. Masters.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.